So over the last year or so, I've noticed a trend starting to happen in the guitar space, which is that a lot of players seem to be switching to Tonex either as their first modeler coming from tube amps or from another platform like Helix or Kemper. Now, one of these players is my good friend, Michael Westbrook. Michael and I have been playing together off and on over the last 10 years or so. He's an amazing player with great ears, really understands guitar sound and how to get great guitar sounds. And he's a full-time touring guy, tours with an artist named Crowder, and recently he switched from using his real tube amps on that run to a pair of Tonexes, and I wanted to ask him why. So I invited him up to sort of walk me through the thought process of going with Tonex over any of the other modeler platforms or his tube amps, as well as put this thing through its paces. We actually did a capture of one of my rigs. We did an identical capture with the Quad Cortex and compared them, as well as compared it to the original amp. And in doing so, I've run into a pretty big problem with the Tonex platform that I haven't encountered with any of the other modelers. I've seen some people talk about this online, but I think this is a bigger deal, at least to me, and so I want to cover it in today's video. Now, I did reach out to Sweetwater and asked them to send me the Tonex to use, and they are sponsoring today's video, so thank you to Sweetwater for doing so. I should point out this is in no way a commercial for Tonex, as you'll probably realize in just a minute. But if you are interested in picking one of these up or anything else that I use to make my videos, consider using the Sweetwater affiliate links in the description. It's a great way to support my channel if you enjoy what I'm doing here. You'll also find links to my video courses down there. You can pick one of those up. And also go subscribe to Michael Westbrook's channel. He's got a few really great videos on this Tonex platform. If you're a Tonex user or considering picking one up, Michael is a great resource for how to get the most out of this thing. So with all that out of the way, let's jump in and get introduced to Michael Westbrook. How long have you been using the Tonex?
I'm getting close to a year now. I was initially using one of the larger units, and then at some point I got a second unit and was using two of the larger units. Man, I've used everything. And I think, we as guitar players, we love the new thing. But I know for me, you essentially have access to any amp you want with a capture situation. I also think it's super portable. I have a pedal board that I know and love, effects that I know and love. And so just replacing the amp side of things rather than going to like a whole ecosystem like, the Quad Cortex. It's just easier. Price of entry helps too. I mean, for two of them, you're significantly less than the Quad Cortex.
Yeah, and you're running two because you're on a big touring gig. And
yeah, I'm running stereo.
Okay, got it. So yeah, I thought one might be a backup or...
No, I mean, I always think of running stereo as kind of like having a backup because I can always go mono if I need to, but hopefully they both wouldn't go down at the same time.
Being a longtime tube amp guy, what made you go down the modeling route to begin with? For
me, especially with this gig that I'm doing now, I'm playing a lot of different instruments. And so I'm playing acoustic instruments, I'm playing banjo, mandolin, but then also electric guitar, pedal steel, dobro that I run through guitar amp type sounds. Trying to kind of have a rig like that and use amps is very complex.
Right. Yeah.
When I can use amps, I still love to use amps, but Tonex kind of lets me take my amps with me in a way, and have the flexibility of jumping between everything.
So what are some like tips and tricks you've learned using this in the real world for the last year with?
We talked about this, the input gain. You've got to figure out where to set that makes sense for you. I don't know that there's like a magic bullet for that, like one specific setting. You've just got to figure that out. You've got to experiment with it. You've got to let your ears kind of lead you there. The onboard compressor, the onboard EQ. I really like using the compressor just subtly. I feel like that the Tonex is very dynamic. It feels like it has a really wide dynamic range. Like even more so than like the amps. Like if I compare them side by side, it's almost like the Tonex doesn't squish as much or sag quite as much. So to kind of combat that a little bit, I do like using the compressor ever so slightly. I find that dialing that in the plugin is a lot easier because you have like gain reduction meters and that kind of thing.
And we should point out too that like, because this is a capture situation, you're taking a snapshot, just like the Kemper, the onboard EQ, the bass, mid, and treble, that 3-band EQ, it's not reacting the same way that your amp's EQ and the tone stack would. Right. It's essentially imprinting a 3-band EQ on top of that capture. Yeah. This unit or any other sort of capture unit, the Quad Cortex, the Kemper, is not going to mimic that part of it. You're just taking a picture of how that amp sounded in that moment as you captured it. All right, so we are set up to capture here, and I want to walk through this process because I think it's really complicated. So basically what's going on is Michael's guitar is plugged into the DI of my interface, a Universal Audio Apollo. We've got a line output of the Apollo going into the Tonex capture box. The output of the Tonex capture box is going into my amp switcher, which is going to the orange AD30 right behind me. That is going downstairs to a high watt 212 cabinet loaded with Fanes. I've got that mic'd up with an AEA R92 ribbon mic and the Austrian Audio OD5, which is running back up here into mic preamps, Great River Audio MP500Vs, which is going back into my Apollo. We're coming out of the Apollo into the Tonex software, and that's basically it. So
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, really simple.
Yeah, it takes a second to wrap your head around it because you're not only dealing with the cable I/O, but you're also got the I/O in your software you're using, like, you know, in this case console or, you know, whatever you're using. It's like there's a few different things you got to get right.
I also encountered a software bug yesterday while trying to set this up in Tonex, which is the second time this has happened, where it just wouldn't send an output from the software to the amplifier to capture. And it required me uninstalling and reinstalling the software to get it. And again, this is not the first time it's happened to me.
I've had the same issue as well, yeah.
Yeah, so there are some software issues with this, but we've got it set up and working now. But this brings up another thing that I ran into when capturing yesterday, which is the guitar level going DI is different than the source selection level from the software.
Yeah, if you like play the pre-recorded clips they're definitely hotter Even the different ones, they all seem like they're putting out more than it would if I just played the guitar.
Yeah, so play for a second.
So I'm playing pretty hard there.
Right. Now listen to the source selection. Like, it's hot enough that I actually have to change the input level on my mic pre.
And those are like kind of single note things.
Yeah.
And you're still getting a lot of level.
This brings up an issue I keep running into with the whole Tonex ecosystem, which is gain structure kind of being all over the place and pretty difficult to understand. Because should we set the amp for your guitar input, or should we set it for the source? And then once we get it dialed in, how is it going to translate to the pedal? It's kind of complicated.
Yeah, I know. I in the past have used like the pre-made, like where you play back, just because they do use some of those when they're capturing the amp. So it's, I guess in my head, I'm like, well, if they're using that to capture the amp, then I'm going to use those to set the amp and get the sound that I want.
Yeah, which is what I'm going to do here. I want the amp to be a little cleaner, so I'm going to dial it back a little bit. So I'm happy with that. We're going to start the capture process here and let it start making all these weird noises. Some of the riffs are pretty good.
I've heard these riffs so many times now. Like, I have my favorites,
Yeah. It's like, okay, so just finished capturing. It took about 20 minutes, the whole process.
Yeah.
I've just been doing the default option for most of these to start off with, because I think the advanced option takes quite a while.
Yeah, I think with my setup, it's taken about an hour or so, or maybe a little longer.
Yeah.
I've compared them. I can't really tell a difference.
Okay. So now it's going to take us through and make sure that our routing is still the same, which it is. So I ran into this yesterday. I think the real rig is a little brighter.
Is the tone model, it feels like it might be a little less gain, maybe?
Yeah, so you have this option to trim your gain here, and then we can play the source clip so that we're just listening, so. Close enough for government work. Okay, so we just recorded a DI guitar and reamped it through the Orange with its setting and reamping it through the Tonex plugin with the capture. So check this out. We'll start with just the amp by itself. Hey, Editor Rhett from the future here. So I wanted to explore this a little bit more. After Michael left the other day, I took my quad Cortex and I made a capture of the exact same amp with the same settings. Nothing changed. The amp didn't even get turned off. And then I even transferred the Tonex capture to the pedal from the plugin and put the same guitar DI track through all of them. So we're now about to listen to the real amp, the Tonex plugin, the Tonex pedal, and the quad Cortex capture. Now, I've noticed a couple of things here. One, the Quad Cortex and the Tonex pedal are really close, which is very, very interesting to me, that two different platforms with different algorithms and a different capture method basically got the same result. So that's pretty cool. And I think that's actually a point in Tonex's favor because the Quad Cortex is significantly more expensive than the Tonex, and they both sound good. However, when you compare both the Tonex and the Quad Cortex capture to the real amp, they're all gainier than the actual amp, and I cannot figure out why. I use the exact same guitar DI track to reamp everything. This very well could be operator error. I could be doing something wrong in this capture process, and I hope someone who's watching this video who's more experienced in this than I am can help shed some light on this in the comments down below. But I just keep running into this issue of gain staging and variability with the Tonex platform. Okay, so they're pretty different.
Yeah, I mean, the Tonex is definitely more overdriven. With Tonex in general, there are so many places that the gain can be altered, right? Like from the capture process to the playing process, you've got input gain on the plugin. Like there's a lot of variability there.
I think there's too much variability. I honestly think this capture process is not very well thought out and extremely complicated. With that said, the capture sounds good. I think that's a good sound. You know, I'd be happy to use that, but it is a little weird knowing that the way this amp is set currently and its capture, which should represent the way the amp is currently set, are two very, very different things. And I'm sure that it was operator error. At some point in the process, I didn't do something correctly to account for the difference in gain structure, but I don't know where that is.
I mean, but it also just speaks to the complexity of the whole process. Like, it's like if there are that many places where something can go wrong, is it overly complicated?
If you're purchasing someone else's captures or downloading someone else's captures, you have to take their gain structure into account and try and get to a similar place on your hardware. Otherwise, it's going to sound wildly different than what you expect it to sound like.
Yeah, and I think I've had guys ask me about it, and it's like, I think ultimately, I think it's a great tool. I think that it is capable of a lot of great tones, but ultimately you just kind of have to figure it out. Like you have to figure out what gain settings are going to work for you and the sound you're going for, because it might not be the same as the creator intended, right?
Yeah. I have found this whole process over the last few days just incredibly frustrating. And I'd say, like yourself, we're pretty well versed in I/O and how to patch things. This is a pain. It just is a huge pain. Part of it is because of my setup, having a patch bay and using UA's console and everything. But man, I don't love it. I don't love it.
Tonex is capable of a lot of great sounds once you get past all of this stuff.
Yeah.
How adept are you at figuring this stuff out? You know, everybody's range of that is going to be different. And especially guys who maybe aren't as tech savvy, they're probably just going to like going and plugging in an amp a lot better.
That's how I feel right now. Honestly, I just want to go plug in an amp and put a mic in front of it and call it a day. It would be so much easier than this. Now, I understand, again, the appeal of being able to capture your amps and put them in the box and have it done the one time. But the process of capturing your amps, it sucks. It just really sucks. It makes me want to just unplug the Tonex, put it back in the box, and just go play an amp. Okay, so to wrap up, my thoughts on the Tonex platform. First of all, I think it's capable of really good sounds. I mean, we're at the place with modeling now where models, plugins are essentially indistinguishable from real amps that are mic'd up in a studio setting. Now, that's a different thing than having an amp in the room or on stage with you actually moving air. Modelers are just not really capable of that in my experience. But when they're compared to a mic'd up in a studio setting sound, they're indistinguishable. I think Tonex is a great tool, especially for players like Michael Westbrook, people that are, coming from a traditional tube amp and pedal board background, but they need a direct solution, and they don't need the full capability and options of a Quad Cortex or an HX Stomp or an Axe Effects. They basically just need their amp sound on their pedal board. I think this is probably the best thing out there that's capable of doing it. That or maybe the Kemper pedal, but I haven't actually tried the Kemper pedal yet. Overall, the plugin works well. It sounds good. It's relatively easy to use. But there's some pretty major drawbacks here, some pretty big issues here. First of all, the fact that I can't edit the sounds on the pedal from the plugin, even though right now the pedal is plugged up via USB to the computer. I have to edit my sounds in the plugin and then transfer them to the pedal. And this brings up issues of gain staging where players have experienced differences in the sound of the plugin versus the pedal. And you have to go into a menu and basically set your input gain to match what you had in the plugin. It's a pain. When you look at Helix, when you look at Axe Effects, even now Kemper, the fact that I can just plug the unit into my computer and I can edit the sounds, I don't understand why IK Multimedia can't do the same thing. The second major issue is the capture process. It is terrible. The fact that you have to have a pretty extensive knowledge of I/O of your setup and how to get everything going and get signal flowing in the right place, and the fact that it takes so long to complete a capture. This really hit home for me when I actually set my Quad Cortex up to do the capture of the same orange rig. I had the Quad Cortex set up, patched in, and a capture completed in under 10 minutes. Compared to over 2.5 hours the day before to get the Tonex capture box set up, it was completely different. Now, part of that was because I had a software issue with Tonex, which took a while to figure out, but even still, it's just so much more complicated and time consuming to use their capture box and their capture system. With the Tonex, over the course of 1 hour, I can only do about 2 or 3 captures with my system. And I have a pretty robust system. I'm running a Mac Studio that's pretty powerful compared to the Quad Cortex where I could do probably between 10 and 15 captures in that same amount of time. It's just so much better. I think it's a great tool. And I think for the right type of player, it is the right choice. But if you are someone that really wants to lean on that capture process, you want to capture your stuff and your sounds and integrate it into your pedal board, I cannot recommend the Tonex. It's too complicated. The software is too clunky. It's way too time consuming. You have to buy a separate piece of gear. It's just not great. But I want to know your thoughts on the Tonex. Do you own one? Has it replaced any of your other modelers or your amp setup? Let me know in the comments section down below. Huge thanks to Michael Westbrook for coming up and filming with me. I will have links to his YouTube channel, his tour dates, as well as his Tonex captures of his amps. If you are a Tonex user, you can check out his stuff available on his website. All that's in the description box down below. Down there, you can also find links to my video courses. If you want to support my channel and you enjoy what I'm doing here, that's a great way to do so. And once again, huge thanks to Sweetwater for sponsoring today's video. I'll have some affiliate links to Tonex and some of the other stuff that I use to make today's video. Consider purchasing something through one of those links. It doesn't cost you any extra, and it's a great way to support my channel if you like what I'm doing over here. My name is Rhett Shull. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.